Alright, class, today we're going to be looking at this stuff called them epithelial tissues. Okay, so if y'all just settle down and pay attention, we'll get through this right quick. If you do it right, we'll do it light. If you do it wrong, we'll do it long. Okay, we don't want to do that for a long time. We just want to get through it. So my name is Mr. Crawford, and so today we're going to be talking about epithelial tissues. So welcome to AMP Radio. I am your host, Mr. Crawford. This is how we're going to be doing the format for this class from here on out. I'm going to try to do my best to upload these as I go through them in class face-to-face, and I'm going to do my best to get these into Schoology so that you guys can see what's going on in class if you're at home. Okay? So on these notes, we're going to be talking and taking a look at this stuff called epithelial tissues. Okay? And so the first thing that we're going to do on these notes is we are going to draw a little dashed line right here, okay? And what this dashed line represents is it lets us know that we're going from a simple type of tissue to a stratified type of tissue, okay? And so if we take a look at this, we can see just by looking at the pictures that as we go down, okay, the complexity of these things, of these tissues, increase. And so that means that as we are looking at these, they're going to become slightly more and more complex. Okay? So the first three tissues we look at are all classified as simple tissues. So we're going to write single layer on all of these, or just single. It doesn't matter if you want to write layer, I guess you could, but single layer on all of these. And these are the bachelor tissues because they're just one single layer. So with epithelial tissues, we classify them by size, shapes, and also how many layers they have. And so the first group that we look at are the simple ones. So, oh, I just wrote the wrong thing. Excuse me. So single, and then layer. So my computer's kind of lagging behind because it's having to actually work for the first time in its life. So if it lags and you can't see what I'm writing, I apologize. So single layer. Okay, so that's these first three tissues. The first one we look at is called squamous tissue. So squamous tissue. And squamous tissue is this single layer of flat tissue. So it is a single layer. It is flat. Okay, it is thin. Okay, so it's flat and thin. Well, so are potato chips. What's that got to do with this lecture? Well, it is flat, thin, and it is also permeable. So there's that word we talked about a couple of days ago, permeable, meaning it goes in and out of things, or that it can go in and out of certain things. So if you don't remember what that is, draw a little arrow and talk about, say, go look up, or goes. Let's take that back. We'll just write it what it means. So permeable means certain objects allowed in. Okay, and so if it's flat, thin, and permeable, and it allows certain objects to go in, we would assume that this probably means that it's also good at something called rapid diffusion. And so rapid diffusion is, if you don't remember what diffusion is, it's when something crosses a membrane, essentially, or it goes from one place to another. And so rapid diffusion is very useful for this type of tissue because it allows nutrients and different materials to be transported across a membrane very easily and very quickly. And so we expect to find these types of tissues in places like blood vessels and in lungs. So we can write blood vessels. And I ran out of room. Blood vessels and lungs. So I'll write that right here. Again, when you look at this stuff for your test, I'm just going to ask that you know the shapes of these molecules, or these types of tissues. You don't need to worry about every single detail. It'll help you later on in life, but for now, we're just going to go as is. Okay. Next, we have cuboidal tissue, and it's called cuboidal because it looks like a cube. Okay, it's literally just a bunch of cube-like structures. And when we talk about the different layers or the different parts of epithelial tissue, we'll go into detail about what the free surface is, but it'll get mentioned in just a second. But the free surface on these guys is right here. So if we look at the squamous tissue, it doesn't really have much of a free surface, whereas these guys have a very well-defined free surface. Okay. So these are a single layer. These are cube-like. And I just realized that the pointer is on there. I don't know why the pointer is on there. I don't want it to be. No, go away. So it's a single layer. It is cube-like, and just like every other tissue that's an epithelial tissue, it's really good at doing two things, and that is secreting, so it's producing something. So it secretes, and it's also good, this is my funky symbol for and, it's also good at absorbing. Okay, so secretes and absorbs, and so absorbs means it's taking in. So a good example of where we can find this is we find it in the kidneys. So it's found in kidneys, and we want tissues like this to be good at secreting and absorbing because our kidneys are what's filtering a lot of our urine and our waste products. It's keeping those good things in our body and keeping the bad things from coming into it. Okay. Next we have columnar tissue, or columnar tissue. So it's a column of something, and so if we look at these guys, we can see the little lines that separate them look like little columns, or it makes these guys look like little columns. So these are very tall cells. So it's a single layer. These are the guys that hit their growth spurt before everybody else. So these are the tall cells. And they are also going to sometimes have little finger-like projections on the tops of them. Okay. And what these little finger-like projections are on the top are what's called cilia or villi. So cilia. And these cilia work alongside these goblet cells, which is a little mucus-producing cell. So goblet cells to secrete and absorb mucus, or secrete mucus. Okay. So the cilia is good at absorbing stuff, and the goblet cells are what's good at secreting stuff. So the goblet cells secrete mucus. And if you don't know what mucus is that slimy stuff that a snail leaves behind. It's the slimy stuff in your nose. It's just the mixture of fluids in your body, and if it gets hardened or coagulated, we call coagulated nasal mucus a booger. So mucus is just found almost everywhere inside the body. So if it's good for absorbing and secretion, we could probably say that this would be a good place to have, or where this would be a good place to have these types of cells would be in the digestive tract. So digestive tract, because we want these cells to be able to absorb as much nutrients as possible from our diet. Okay, so that's it for the bachelor cells. So all of these guys here are going to be single layer, single layer, single layer. Okay. When we go to the ones down below, these are going to differ because these are all going to be what's known as stratified tissues. And so these stratified tissues will do a different color. But stratified means that it's going to have 2+ layers, or it's going to have more than one layer. Okay. Let me make the pin smaller. And so stratified is 2+. Let me make the pin a little bit smaller. 2+ layers. This guy is also going to be 2+ layers. And then this guy is also going to be 2+ layers. Okay? Oh, S. And so the first one we talk about is called this stratified squamous tissue. Stratified squamous tissue is often a thick layer, so it is a thick layer. And when I say thick, I mean just thicker than most cells. Again, this is like your skin, so it's very thin relative to other things, but it's a thick layer for protection. So it's a thick layer for protection. And so this squamous epithelial tissue is what surrounds your skin. It's what is your skin. Okay, so when you scratch yourself and it flakes off, that's just dead squamous tissue. Okay, you cut yourself, the tissue heals. That's squamous tissue. It heals very quickly. So it's found in what we call the epidermal layer, which means above the dermis. So it's in the epidermal layer. And so this is our skin, essentially. And so that's squamous tissue. That's stratified squamous tissue. Okay, it regenerates pretty quickly. Next, we have cuboidal and columnar stratified tissue, and these two types of tissues are kind of rare in the body. So we're going to write rare in body for both of them. Rare in body. My mouse is kind of lagging, so I apologize. And the cuboidal ones are going to be found in the salivary glands and also, if you have them, the mammary glands. Okay, so mammary glands are what are producing milk and nutrients if a woman is breastfeeding or she's pregnant, and salivary glands are producing saliva. So that's the stuff in our mouth when we spit. It's just spit. And then last we have columnar tissue, and this is also rare in the body. It's only found in the larynx and the male urethra and so this type of tissue is really not multiple layers of columnar tissue. It's really just one layer of columnar tissue that is seated on some stratified cuboidal tissue, as we can see from the picture. Okay, so that's it for these stratified tissues. When we come down here, we have two types of specialized tissues that really don't fit into this category, but they are nevertheless increased or more complex than the previous. And these are called pseudostratified and transitional tissues. Now, what we look at when we see pseudostratified is we see all these little dots all over the place, and these are the nuclei of the cell. So the nuclei of the cell are kind of all over the place. And so we say that the nuclei are uneven as a way to describe these. And we also say that they are also just kind of weird looking. They're kind of oddballs. They don't fit anywhere. This word pseudo means fake. So it's a fake stratified or falsely stratified groups of tissue. So it doesn't really fall into any particular category. So to describe these guys, we would say uneven nuclei, and we would also say that they are good at secreting and absorbing. So they secrete and absorb, and they are found primarily in the upper respiratory tract. Again, my mouse is kind of lagging, or my draw pad is lagging because I'm having software record me speaking and drawing, and my little MacBook apparently can't handle it. Lastly, we have transitional tissue, and it's called transitional tissue because it goes from being like this pseudo-stratified tissue to kind of like just being this stretched out and compressed looking mess. Okay, so when it stretches out, it kind of turns into it almost looks like squamous tissue that's stratified. But it varies in appearance as layers stretch or transition, so it kind of changes, and that's why it gets the name transitional tissue. Okay, so we don't really need to know that one as much. The only interesting thing about this is that it's found in the lining of the bladder. And the bladder is what contains the urine prior to it leaving the body. Okay. All right, so that goes over epithelial tissues that are just simple and stratified. We have another type of tissue that we're going to see, and that is called glandular epithelial tissue. Okay, and so glandular epithelial tissue, your notes are going to look like this. It is a gland, so that means it is like a small sac of tissue. Okay, so we're going to start down at the bottom because I find that this is a little bit easier for students to understand. So we're going to start with the endocrine system, or the endocrine glands. And so I'm going to try to get this over to where you can see it and still see me. Let me see if I can zoom out a little bit. There we go. So the endocrine glands are these glands that are directly connected with the blood vessels. And so that's what we see right here with this capillary. And a capillary, in case you don't know, is a tiny blood vessel. And you don't have to write this on your notes unless it'll help you, but that's just what it is, okay? So this capillary comes in and it intersects, and sometimes it will even wind through, or it does wind through with the gland, and as it's winding through this gland, it makes this gland very efficient because it does that. So what it does is these endocrine glands, they're secreting hormones into the blood, and so endo means into. So it's secreting hormones into the blood, so it's going from its little cell, so if this is the little adrenaline, or like we use the example in adrenal gland, so adrenaline, it's like when you get scared. All these little cells are endocrine cells, and they're packed together in this gland, and the hormone that they're going to produce is called adrenaline, and so that's what happens when you get scared. It produces this fight or flight response, and you get an adrenaline rush. And so these cells will secrete their or excrete their products through a process called exocytosis. And so exocytosis, exo means out and cyto means cell, so it's going out of the cell. So they secrete their products out of their cell and it goes directly into the bloodstream. That's why when you feel an adrenaline rush, you feel it so rapidly, because it's going directly into your bloodstream and it doesn't have to go through any sort of indirect pathways in order to get it into your blood, okay? So it's going into your blood, or into some type of system. Typically it's the blood. To contrast with that, we have what are known as exocrine glands up here at the top. So the first thing I want you to do is understand that exo means out. Then I want you to go back and just underline the little abbreviations, or the little first parts of each of these words, okay? And so let's just break these down by image. So if we look at these, what we're trying to figure out is how products inside of a cell are getting out of their cell, and we can just kind of look at these pictures and figure that out. But if we wanted to go into detail, we'd actually have to read the definition and talk about it, which is what I get paid to do. So for a merocrine tissue, for a merocrine cell, cells excrete their products via exocytosis. So there's something inside the cell, they want it to leave, they just push it out through the membrane, okay? Exo means it's going out, cyto means cell. So an example of this is the sweat glands. And so your sweat glands are what keep you cool during the summertime, or if you get nervous talking to that person you admire. These sweat glands trigger and they produce a small film of water or sweat on the surface of your skin. It's just the sweat and salt going from the cell, out of the cell onto the surface of your skin, okay? And so meros is only part of the product gets, or part of the cell is leaving it, okay? Next we have apocrine glands, and so apos means tip, kind of like an apical meristem. It's kind of a good way to remember it. It's the tip of a root or plant shoot. If you're into video games, you can say, oh, Apex Legends, it means I'm the best at something. The way that these work is they literally pinch off a portion of their cell, and so apos means tip. They're literally pinching off the tip of this particular cell. So the example in this is a mammary gland. So the gland that produces breast milk for babies from the mother. If it's producing lactose or some sort of sugar and other nutrients inside these cells, they will start to build up and build up, and then eventually what will happen is the cell will bud off and it will produce a small vesicle that will go where it's needed, and then that vesicle probably will dissolve, or the wall will dissolve, but then the cell goes back to being normal and you end up with just that process repeated. But what distinguishes this from the other types is that it literally pinches off a portion of the products. Lastly, we have the holocrine glands, which rupture and spill products into the duct or opening or whatever you want to call some type of place for the product to go. So whole means whole, and an example is the sebaceous gland. So sebaceous glands are these glands on the face that produce the oils. They sometimes like to get blocked, and so when they get blocked, you get acne and you get zits. And so what happens is that zit starts to build up and build up and build up. Again, this is the cell, not your pore, but it builds up and builds up, and eventually it pops, okay? At least that's what 99% of America does. They go and they pop the zit instead of just leaving it be, which is maybe what we're supposed to do, I don't know. But it ruptures and it spills out into this opening or onto the surface of your skin, okay? And so these holocrine glands are rupturing and spilling their products into this opening that we call a duct or surface, okay? And so that's pretty much it. That is essentially epithelial tissues in a nutshell. Again, this is going to be posted into Schoology, so if you don't have the notes for this, or if you were absent one day, this is a good resource for you to watch and sit through in case you get confused about something or another. If you like this, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. Feel free to turn on the notification buttons and subscribe to my channel at apclassroom.us.youtube.com/org. Just kidding, don't actually go there. It's not a real place. Just go do your homework.